This is my first real winter in New York City, and I'm going to tell you, man, I never seen a city clear the roads as quick as New York City did. It was unbelievable, and they're very proud of it, but what they don't talk about is they bury everybody's vehicle. And it's so crazy that, like, this is like a hot take that I have. I couldn't believe, I walked outside, and I told my wife, I go, we don't have a car anymore. But I go, you're not going to believe this. The roads are completely clear. I go, they put all the snow on everybody's vehicles. And then they made PSAs about, make sure you pace yourself when you shovel. People have heart attacks. And do you realize how insane it is to do that to people and then warn them about how bad it's going to be? I mean, it's only me and my wife. I don't have a family of 9 where we can all go, hey, on the count of 3, push, you know. I'm just out there. She's like, what are we going to do? I go, we're going to Uber until April, Melissa. Because clearly this isn't going to thaw out. It's 11 degrees. We needed a groundhog to tell us there's no spring coming.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Jordan Peterson Thursday, February the 19th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and an adaptation of Jordan Peterson. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you, Maria, then Stu.
Welcome back. Breaking news this morning. King Charles speaking out on the arrest of his brother, former Prince Andrew, which we reported earlier this morning. King Charles III releasing this statement. I've learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair, and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the King writes, the law must take its course, says King Charles, reacting to Andrew's arrest this morning. We're about 30 minutes away from the opening bell sounding on a Thursday. Let's check stocks this morning. We're around the lows of the morning this morning, despite the fact that we had, once again, better than expected economic data this morning. The Dow Industrial is down 172, the S&P is down 22, and the NASDAQ is lower by 102. Of course, all eyes on the GDP out tomorrow morning, as well as the PCE inflation tomorrow morning. We'll have those reports for you as they happen tomorrow morning. Metals year to date up. Silver way off of the highs of the year. Gold prices up better than 14% year to date, outperforming stocks, by the way, in 2026. Silver is flat, up just a fraction. And here is oil right now with the price of crude up this morning, better than 2%, sitting at a level of 66.55. Brent is up almost 2% at 71.68. We're going to continue following markets and politics tomorrow morning. Join us Mornings with Maria live every weekday. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you again then. Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
All right. Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. The bombshell story is not about the markets or U.S. politics. It's about the accountability of the British royal family and Britain's Prime Minister. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the former Duke of York and the brother of King Charles, has been arrested. He's accused of misconduct as a public official, reportedly trafficking women to entertain at Buckingham Palace and leaking secret trade information to Jeffrey Epstein. It is a bombshell for the royals. They've been tainted, and a bombshell for British politics. Keir Starmer's government may fall. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, he may go to prison. Accountability is now driving British politics. Back home, the President's Board of Peace is about to meet in D.C. at issue who will disarm Hamas and who will pay to rebuild Gaza. Let's get to the markets. Modest gains for stocks Wednesday, modest losses pre-market Thursday. Dow off about 170, S&P down 20, NASDAQ down roughly 100 points. Gold is above 5,000 an ounce, 5,014. Bitcoin, I still call it range-bound. It's still around $67,000 right now. No, drop down. 65.9 is the current quote. Oil, that's moving up, 66.52 per barrel. Little change for gas, it's at 2.92. Now, oil, that's moving because the massive military buildup is almost complete in the Mideast. The president's putting maximum pressure on Iran. There is speculation that some form of military action could come this weekend. Oil up, gold up. On the show today, President Trump heads to Georgia this afternoon. He'll be in friendly territory. He will return to the issue of affordability. With 9 months to the midterms, he has to convince voters that the economy is in good shape and getting better. Bernie Sanders at it again at a rally in California. He supports the wealth tax. That is not a tax. It is the confiscation of wealth. They just take it off you. That now dominates the Democrat agenda. Their campaign for the midterms rests on hate Trump and tax the rich. It is a big, jam-packed show this Thursday, February the 19th, 2026. Varney and Company is about to begin.
And that was Stuart Varney. He actually showed up to work. What do you know? Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, motivation.
You're going to have sometimes low moments when you won't want to get out of bed. You just want to stay there. At times you won't want to come out the house. It's hard living. Life is hard. It's hard handling just the tragedies of life. It's hard when you're working on something and you put everything you have in it and it doesn't work out. You lose your money and other people's money. It's hard. You will go through things, and while you're going through them, you can't understand why it's happening to you.
And it's in these moments right now that so often we feel like backing down.
What is it that will make it worth it for you to face the rejections? What is it that will make it worth it for you to brainstorm and not be intimidated and say, I can do this? What is it that will make it worth it for you to raise the bar on yourself and say, I got some more stuff in me? What is it that will make it for you when you want to give up and things are working against you? What is it that will help you get back up again?
A man's character is not judged after he celebrates a victory but by what he does when his back is against the wall. So no matter how great the setback, how severe the failure, you never give up.
You're going to fail. You're going to make some mistakes. You got to fight. You will have opposition. Things going to happen to you in life. It's called life, and it's not personal. Stuff's going to happen.
Sure, you might lose comfort and sleep. Sure, it might be frightening. But so what?
The darker the night, the brighter the morning.
You will fail your way to success. It doesn't matter how many times you fail. It doesn't matter how many times people tell you that you can't do it. It doesn't matter if you don't have a dime in the bank.
The thing that's causing you pain today actually has purpose in your life. Every season you can learn. Every season you can grow. Every challenge is developing you.
That which does not kill you will make you stronger.
I don't need you thinking about it no more. You're doing too much thinking. You're analyzing too much. You're talking yourself out of it. I don't know if this is going to work. I tried and it didn't work. I just need you to keep moving. I need you to make up in your mind that the only way you can lose is if you quit. I just need you to keep going. Get emotional if you must. Cry if you must. Get it out. But get your butt back up after you finish crying and put a time limit on the crying. You say, Coach, I need 30 minutes. Don't take it. But when you come back after that 31 minutes, you better grind. Because if you don't, you'll be stuck at that adversity for the rest of your life. And some of you are not successful because every single time you run up against a trial, every time you run up against a tribulation, you stop and you cut off beast mode. And what I'm here to tell you is, if you tell that thing, I'm here just like you here, and I promise you, I ain't leaving without the degree. I will not leave without that goal. I will not leave without that dream. I will not leave this university until I'm successful. I will not leave this job. I will not leave this client. I will not leave this opportunity until I get it.
Are you in a storm or are you just in between two miracles?
You take those terrible events in your life and you create a new story of triumph. We gotta become something new. We take those traumas, we take that pain, and we allow it to become a part of who we want to be.
What if I told you you got everything you need to make it through your storm? This storm will not take you out.
And I know you've been tired, and I know it's been hurting, and I know it's been lifelong, and it might be an addiction. It may be wondering how much longer you're gonna have a job, or when you're gonna get one, or when this is all gonna be over. But you're not gonna die in this trial. You're gonna make it. In fact, you're gonna be better.
You see, the fight's not over if you've been knocked down. It's only over if you quit. If you make the decision to get up one more time, I'm telling you, you will win the fight.
And that was Motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, some meditation.
Et ad Dominum cum corde contritor meamus, mundanos Deus sicut pros matutimus, qui cadit super herbam humiliatam. In pulverem redemptus, non desperamus misericordiam tua, quia tu Domine spernis cor contritur, ne populum lacrimante Pace Domine, parce populo tuo, nei mira tua declinamus. Sed in mansuetudine tua reficiamus. Facredo Maria animas nostra. Ut vetus homo in nobis consumatur. In isto die abstinentie, aperi pectus nostrum veritati, et disrumpe vincula peccati, que nos ligant quasi noctis catene, illumina vias nostras, ut Cresus nostros dirige ad pacem. Memento moquia pulvis est, et ad pulverem reverteris, sed in te, Christe, pulvis resurget in gloria, quia virtus tua mortem superavi. O Deus pietatis altissime, exaudi clamorem humilium, qui cinem accipium ut vitam novam in corde suscipiam. Infunde in nos spiritum compunctionis, et restitue letitiam sanitatis tuae. Dies generis et conversionis, initium viae purificationis. Duc nos per anc noctem penitentiae ad lumen resurrectionis. In te, Domine, spes nostra, non moritur.
And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is not a Jordan Peterson speech, but an adaptation of a Jordan Peterson speech that I call the True Conservative Manifesto. Thank you. Now, part one of the True Conservative Manifesto. Let's talk about something that the would-be conservative instinctively misunderstands. The notion that being kind is always the right response. The would-be conservative has learned that niceness is a virtue, that turning the other cheek is noble, and in most situations among normal people, that's true. But here's the problem. The liberal does not operate by the same moral or psychological framework. Niceness isn't seen by the liberal as a generous act. It is seen as a signal that the conservative is willing to submit. Once the liberal has picked up on that, the dynamic changes completely and irreversibly. The liberal views relationships as hierarchy, not as collaboration. It's a dominance game. They don't seek intimacy, they seek leverage. So when a conservative is nice and offers a liberal understanding, forgiveness, and compassion, the liberal thinks, good, I've got him trained. Liberalism is, at its core, a compensatory pathology. It masks a deeply fragmented sense of self, a grandiose sense of self, one that requires constant external validation in order to survive. The liberal feeds off that validation, and the conservative's niceness becomes the most delicious form of supply. Here's where it gets dangerous, because the conservative instinctively gives the benefit of the doubt, soothes conflict, and sees the best in everyone. But those instincts, which serve the conservative beautifully in most of life, are weaponized in the liberal's world. The liberal exploits the gap between the conservative's assumption of shared values and the liberal's calculated manipulation. While the conservatives think that he is building a bridge, the liberal is mapping out the conservative's pressure points. This is why the conservative that is caught in liberal relationships, romantic, professional, even familial, feels such cognitive dissonance. The conservative keeps thinking, if I'm just patient enough, kind enough, the liberal will change. The liberal will see that I'm different. What the conservative doesn't realize is that his kindness is being filed away as weakness. It emboldens the liberal, justifies their behavior. It teaches them that the conservative will tolerate more because he already has. There's a concept in behavioral psychology known as intermittent reinforcement. This is when unpredictable rewards strengthen behavior more than consistent ones. The liberal is a master of this. The liberal gives just enough kindness, just enough false hope to keep the conservative engaged, and the more that the conservative pours in, the more the liberal takes. It becomes a cycle. Conservative niceness enables liberal pathology, and the liberal will not stop because the liberal sees no reason to. Why would they, when the system works in their favor? Now, some might say, isn't it cruel to be anything but kind? Don't we all deserve grace? To that I say, kindness without boundaries is not grace, it's self-betrayal. When conservatives are nice to someone who exploits, manipulates, and gaslights them, they're not being moral, they're being complicit. That's a hard pill to swallow, but if their goodness consistently gets them hurt, it's not goodness anymore. It's naivete, and worse, it feeds the very dysfunction that the conservative is trying to fix. There's a deeper philosophical issue here, too. At what point does compassion become cowardice? When does the refusal to confront the liberal's destructive behavior stop being noble and start being self-destructive? That's a question that every conservative entangled with a liberal must eventually face, because niceness in that context becomes a moral bypass. You're not avoiding conflict for peace. You're avoiding it because you're afraid of being disliked, afraid of being the bad guy. The liberal can sense that. They smell fear like blood in the water. It's important for the conservative to remember that no one is obliged to be nice to people that have made a habit of hurting them. Respect must be mutual. Empathy must be reciprocal. Otherwise, the conservative is not in a relationship. He's in a performance. Every time the conservative chooses niceness over truth, he extends the liberal stage. The liberal keeps acting, and the conservative keeps applauding, hoping that the script will change, but it won't. Because for the liberal, it was never about truth to begin with. It was about control. The conservative is not here to be the liberal's emotional fuel. He's not here to be drained, diminished, and discarded. The conservative is here to live a life aligned with values, dignity, boundaries. The first step is recognizing that the liberal sees conservative kindness not as a gift, but as an opportunity to dominate, deceive, and destroy. So stop being nice to liberals. Be honest, be firm, be willing to walk away. Because in the end, real strength is not found in how long the conservative can endure the liberal's chaos. It's found in the conservative's ability to choose truth over the liberal narrative, and that, in the truest sense, is the most moral thing the conservative can do. Now, let's examine something far more subtle and more insidious: empathy. The very trait that society, quite rightly, teaches us to cultivate. The capacity to see and feel what another person is experiencing is a cornerstone of morality. Without it, cooperation would collapse. Civilization itself would disintegrate into tribal brutality. Empathy, like any virtue, when divorced from discernment, becomes a liability. And that's what the liberal understands in a way that the conservative doesn't. Most people assume that empathy is an inherently noble trait. But here's the reality. Empathy is only noble when it's exercised within the boundaries of truth and mutual responsibility. The liberal doesn't relate to empathy as something to be valued. The liberal sees it as something to use, to wield. The conservative's emotional attachment, desire to soothe, to understand, to repair is a weakness that the liberal will manipulate as easily as a puppeteer pulls strings. And the liberal is good at it because the liberal studies conservatives, not in a conscious, reflective way, but instinctively. The liberal observes conservative tells, triggers, guilt. The liberal listens for phrases like, "I just want peace," or "maybe I was too harsh." Every time the conservative hesitates to defend himself in the name of keeping the peace, the liberal takes note, logs it, and builds a psychological playbook specifically tailored to the conservative's vulnerabilities. That's what makes this so profoundly damaging. The conservative is not being exploited because he is weak in some fundamental way. Quite the contrary, he's being exploited because he cares, because his emotional radar is finely tuned, and because he believes that if he could just understand the liberal's pain, if he could just help the liberal feel safe or seen, the liberal would stop hurting him. And that's the True Conservatives Manifesto, Part 1. Back in a minute. Thank you. Part 2. The liberal isn't seeking healing, they're seeking control. And the conservative's empathy is the perfect way to achieve it. Liberals will tell half-truths, spin stories about how conservatives have wronged them, and present themselves as misunderstood victims, not because they are, but because they know it will activate the conservative's compassion. The moment that they activate the compassion, they'll own the frame. The conservative is no longer evaluating the liberal's behavior critically. He is rationalizing it. He is justifying what is, in reality, deeply manipulative conduct. This is why so many conservatives feel emotionally hijacked. They start to doubt their own reality. They feel cruel for setting boundaries, feel selfish for expressing hurt. That's not an accident. That is the result of a prolonged empathy manipulation. The liberal uses the conservative's very humanity as a tool of control. The conservative doesn't realize it until their emotional bank account is empty and they're still being told that they haven't done enough. Here's the deeper issue. When the conservative's empathy overrides his judgment, he becomes a participant in his own exploitation. The conservative must awaken to a critical truth. No one is morally obligated to understand someone who weaponizes kindness. No one owes patience to someone who uses that patience as permission to violate emotional boundaries. Empathy without limits leads to codependency. It keeps conservatives locked into a cycle where the conservative's identity becomes tied to fixing the liberal's chaos. That's not compassion. That's self-erasure. The liberal thrives in that environment because the more that the conservative disappears, the more room that the liberal has to dominate. It becomes a psychological colonization where the conservative's instincts serve the liberal's pathology. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is to practice wise empathy. Empathy with accountability. Compassion that includes conservatives in the equation. When a conservative feels that he's being pulled into the liberal's orbit via pity or guilt, he needs to pause and ask, whose needs are being met right now? Is this emotional exchange reciprocal or am I being played like a violin for someone else's narrative control? When the conservative switches from blind empathy to discerning empathy, everything changes. He starts to understand that some people don't want to be understood, but obeyed. Once the conservative sees that clearly, he stops trying to fix them. He stops trying to get them to see his perspective because he realizes that they already do. Liberals just don't care. And that ultimately is the bitter truth. The liberal's not confused, not broken in a way that can be mended. The liberal is strategic, performative. Liberals have learned that the conservative's empathy is the perfect tool to keep the conservative invested, while liberals continue to manipulate. Liberals don a mask of victimhood, but once the conservative claims his empathy and pairs it with discernment, he removes liberal power. He stops playing the role that liberals assigned him. He starts becoming something far more dangerous to the liberal than an enemy. He becomes someone that liberals can no longer control. Let's talk about the concept of passivity, because contrary to what the conservative has been taught, being passive is not synonymous with being good. In fact, passivity, particularly when it is habitual, unexamined, or rooted in fear, can be one of the most dangerous traits that a conservative can carry, especially when entangled with a liberal. See, when a conservative is passive, he's not modeling virtue, he's offering compliance. He is signaling that he's willing to abandon his own values, his own intuition, and often his own dignity in order to avoid conflict, preserve the illusion of peace, or keep the relationship intact. The liberal sees it, feels it, and most importantly, exploits it. Liberals operate within a psychological structure that is deeply hierarchical. In the liberals' world, there are dominators and there are the dominated. There are those who serve and those who are served. Power is the game and control is the reward. Now, when the conservative shows up to that dynamic with his hands open, with his boundaries soft, with his instincts muted by the compulsion to be passive, he's not diffusing the power imbalance. He's reinforcing it. He is confirming silently but unmistakably that liberals are in charge, and he is not. The more he complies, the more the abuse escalates. It doesn't necessarily start with overt cruelty. Often it begins with small requests, subtle manipulations, guilt trips that are disguised as emotional need, and because the conservative is passive and doesn't want to upset the liberal, he gives in. Again and again, he tolerates the criticisms and rationalizes the gaslighting. He suppresses his resentment and calls it patience. And all the while, he believes he's keeping the peace. In reality, he is just feeding the machine. The liberal system thrives on his silence, on his self-sacrifice, on his willingness to be the container for their chaos. With every moment the conservative chooses passivity over truth, he disappears just a little more. His voice, his needs, his individuality, they erode under the pressure of maintaining an illusion, and that illusion is designed to keep him in his place. It might be asked, what's wrong with being passive? Well, here's the fundamental problem. Passivity conflates kindness with avoidance. The conservative thinks that if he can just keep things smooth, if he doesn't rock the boat, the liberal will stop the behavior. Liberals, however, don't respond to smoothness. They respond to structure, to consequence. They respect, in a twisted sense of the word, the conservative that refuses to play the game, the one who stops accommodating dysfunction, the one who says no and means it. Passivity becomes a mask, a way to hide fear, a way to avoid the uncomfortable work of confrontation, of self-assertion, of standing in the uncomfortable truth that sometimes passive alone isn't enough to fix a liberal. Some people don't want to be helped. They want to dominate. And if the conservative keeps showing up with softness when what's needed is strength, he's not just enabling liberals, he's endorsing their behavior. What's required is not cruelty, but clarity, not aggression, but assertiveness. Boundaries are not acts of hostility, they are declarations of self-respect. And that was part 2 of the True Conservatives Manifesto. Back in a minute. Part 3. When the conservative begins to shift from nice to honest, from passive to principled, the liberal will often escalate their tactics because the power structure that the conservative once upheld with niceness is beginning to collapse. That threatens the very core of liberal control. It's in that moment, when the mask slips, when the rage surfaces, when the manipulations intensify, that the conservative will be tempted to revert, to go back to being nice, to smooth it over. But the conservative needs to understand this. The temptation is not compassion, it's conditioning. The only way to break it is to recognize that conservative niceness was never keeping the peace. It was simply prolonging the war. What must replace niceness is a deeper, more courageous form of responsibility. The willingness to face conflict in order to uphold truth. The willingness to endure discomfort in the name of self-integrity. That's what the liberal fears. Not conservative anger, but conservative awakening. The conservatives' refusal to participate, the conservatives' conscious decision to no longer bend their will to the distorted needs of liberals who have built their identity on their submission. So the next time that the conservative feels that pull to be nice, to stay quiet, to smile when they want to scream, to explain themselves endlessly in the hope of being understood, they should pause. Ask themselves, am I choosing peace or am I choosing to be controlled? Because when the conservative stops enabling the liberal with niceness, when the conservative begins to draw a line in the sand, not out of rage, but out of deep self-respect, that's when the power begins to shift. One of the most insidious myths that conservatives have absorbed is that being nice is the same as being virtuous. That if you smile, comply, and never ruffle feathers, they're doing the right thing. That's not virtue. That's avoidance. More often than not, what the conservatives label as nice is actually a mask, one that hides fear, codependency, and a deeply rooted discomfort with standing up for ourselves. Let's be honest. Most people who consistently act nice in the face of abuse aren't doing it because they're saints. They're doing it because they're scared. They're afraid of conflict, afraid of being disliked, afraid of what will happen if they assert themselves. In the context of liberal abuse, that fear becomes the foundation of the entire dynamic. When you're in a relationship with a liberal, social or political, it's not just a matter of misunderstanding, it's a battle of frameworks. The liberal's driven by control and validation. Conservatives, on the other hand, might be driven by harmony, connection, and acceptance. So, what happens when these forces collide? Conservatives start giving and liberals keep taking. That imbalance grows rapidly, and the conservatives' niceness, their reluctance to say no and to challenge becomes the very mechanism that allows the liberal to dominate. The reason that this niceness continues isn't because the conservative is too good. It's because the conservative's sense of self is often tied to the approval of others. That's codependency. The need for external validation to regulate internal stability. Now here's the deeper issue. Codependency isn't compassion. It's self-abandonment dressed up as loyalty. Conservatives begin to think that they're doing right by staying quiet, absorbing blame, by fixing what they didn't break, but really they're just disappearing. Slowly, willingly. And that disappearance isn't a noble sacrifice. It's a psychological escape from the responsibility of selfhood. Liberals are experts at identifying people like this. They can sense, often unconsciously, who will make themselves small, who will carry the emotional weight, who will flinch first. And the liberal doesn't admire the conservative's niceness. They exploit it because the inability to enforce boundaries doesn't signal kindness. It signals utility. The conservative is useful when being compliant and disposable when they aren't. So let's be clear. Being agreeable in a situation that demands strength is not the moral high ground. It's a symptom of an underdeveloped sense of self. That's why so many victims of liberal abuse feel confused. They believe that they were doing everything right. They were accommodating, patient, and forgiving. But instead of being met with respect or appreciation, they're met with more manipulation, more lies, more emotional violence. Why? Because what the liberal respects, what any predator respects, is not submission, but strength. Niceness, especially when it's compulsive, reads as weakness. To break this cycle, the conservative doesn't need to become harsh or cruel. They need to become honest. Honest about why the conservative is afraid of conflict, and honest about the emotional cost of keeping the peace. Honest about how much time the conservative has spent managing the liberals' reactions rather than expressing the conservative's own reality. Niceness, when it's paired with boundaries, that's grace. But niceness that's automatic and reactive, that's fear. That's a strategy for not being abandoned, not being attacked, not being rejected. That strategy, while it might once have kept the conservatives safe, is now destroying the conservatives' ability to live a life rooted in integrity. So the question is not, are you as a conservative being nice? The question is, are you being real? Are you showing up with truth, with courage, with the willingness to say, I will not abandon myself to make the liberal comfortable? Because when the conservative stops masking their fear with niceness, when they let go of the illusion that compliance will earn them approval, something powerful happens. The conservative begins to reclaim themselves. Their time, their energy, their dignity. They stop being a character in the liberal story and start writing their own. The liberal will notice. They'll push back. They'll accuse the conservative of being selfish and cold. That's not a sign that they're doing something wrong. That's a sign that the dynamic is breaking. That's a sign that the conservative is waking up. The truth is that the conservative's niceness was never protecting them. It was simply postponing the inevitable. The day that the conservative chooses courage over comfort is the day that the healing begins. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.